And again, so doing the things that we love with the people we love, ultimate sacrifices, ultimate service. Stakes couldn't be higher. Requires absolute best, or you don't stay there. How do you go from that to saying you'll never do that again, and weren't even given a moment's notice to ponder the secondary path?
Hi, I'm Patrick Brennan.
And I'm Daniel Bell. This is AfterSOF.
Today we were fortunate to get a chance to interview Andrew Marr, who is a former Green Beret and has gone through a long journey of healing from suffering some traumatic brain injuries, PTSD as he transitioned out of the military, and ultimately resulting in him starting Warrior Angels Foundation. And he's produced a documentary as well as written a book about this new healing protocol, and he's trying to get it out to as many veterans as possible.
We had a few technical difficulties, but overall it was a great conversation, and we look forward to having further conversations with Andrew. Make sure to visit his website. It's warriorsangelsfoundation.org. That's warriorsangelsfoundation.org. And we hope you enjoy this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Andrew, appreciate you being on the show, man. Really excited about this episode and learning about what you got going on. But let's start from the beginning. Let's start, life before the military and how you got drawn into it.
Yeah, honored to be here, my brothers. Life before the military. One of four boys. I was the oldest of my mom and dad's union. And two younger brothers, 2 years apart behind me. Grew up in Dallas-Fort Worth area, the suburbs of Texas, in a place called Grapevine, Texas. Very athletic from an early age. Probably from 5 or 6, that's all I wanted to do. And then at age 10, found contact football. And that's all I wanted to do all the way through my last snap. In college, where I was a scholarship athlete, started all 4 years, academic All-American and, accolades on the field as well. NFL didn't come calling. That was 2006. Graduated high school in 2000. So looking for the next evolution of things to do with my life that provided purpose and a meaning. And it's kind of the first time ever I was presented with maybe a crossroads of this is where I've been doing in my entire life, and now I got to do something new, and I don't exactly know what that needs to be. So transition to the military was relatively easy for me. Finished my undergrad summer of 2006 and enlisted in October of that year. So literally about 2 months after I finished that. I knew I wanted to, it's the height of the war at that time, and I wanted to test myself in combat, plain and simple, and looking for what I thought was the best way to do that. Wanted to go Delta Force. There was no initial route to that, and so Green Beret, Special Forces seemed like the next best option because they had a 18 X-ray program where you could go basically, from off the street into the training pipeline if you made the cut. And so that's what I chose, and was able to get through in the selection, into the course, and into becoming tabbed in less than 2 years. Right to an operational team in first group, and from 2009 till 2013 to my last deployment, I was in combat every calendar year so almost 5 years total team time on the same team. And it was all I ever wanted, man. Got to live the entire spectrum of the operator experience, multiple theaters, saw significant combat, and didn't see myself doing really anything else. So at that time, I was certain that my purpose was to lead men into battle and to defeat evil. And so that was pretty black and white, and that was my purpose. And the men that I was fortunate, blessed and privileged to be around were everything to me outside of my wife and children. And I knew that mine was the same. And every decision, everything we did, we brought our best, because never wanted to let that spirit down, let those men down, because of something I failed to do or failed to prepare, or anything of that magnitude. So everything in my career, man, had a high priority on it, high level of sacrifice to get there. And everybody that I, again, was blessed to serve with knew the stakes. So doing that, as you gentlemen well know, to become proficient in the art of war, there's only one way to do that, and that is to practice it. That is to prepare for it, and that is to live it, eat it, breathe it, and sleep it. One of my specialties on the team was, as an 18 Charlie, an engineer dealing with explosives, and explosive breacher ended up being the senior breacher for my team. What that means is you're around a lot of explosions, a lot of low-level blasts, just in training, before you ever get to do that in a real-world scenario. So bottom line, guys, is I was before I was forced to be medically retired, just under 9 years, I was in a significant amount of explosions, but I never had a real injury. So not a scratch on my body, not missing an arm, not missing an eye, there's no gunshot wound, there's no sunken chest, performing at a relatively high level for the majority of my life in an elite fighting unit, just like yourselves. And then go with that contrast. One day I wake up and, you found yourself with 33 diagnosed disabilities on double-digit medications, and told, like, hey, man, you can't afford one more blast. Don't know what could happen, potentially turn lethal. And because of that, we can no longer use your highly developed skill set and services. But thank you for your service. Here's the door. Boom, here's this double-digit bag of medication. And so that was my high-level pathway in and pathway out. And, from that point, it was attempting to kind of orient myself, collect myself, and figure out what was the next best move. Because, I'll just stop there. Because there's a lot we can unpack, and we can take it any which way that you guys feel is best for the audience. But, those are the high-level things that brought me to that unit and then ushered me out very quickly.
Yeah, I was an 18 X-ray myself, and so I kind of want to touch on that a bit. We talk about this topic of identity loss, right? A lot of guys, whether it's through retirement or through just leaving the military, everybody's got this sort of identity loss, right? It doesn't matter what job or MLS you had, people experience it. But, when you look at someone like yourself who, coming up and being an athlete, belonging to a team, through high school and college, looking for the next thing, right? Looking for that sort of a higher purpose. And you find that in the military. And everything's so accelerated, right? You're talking about 4 years, combat in each one of those years, multiple theaters, like the maturity level from, I don't know, let's say 24 years old to 28 years old. In that 4-year time, like you aged quite a bit, right? From a maturity level.
Oh yeah, no
and
doubt.
Found a huge purpose in that space, right?
100%.
It's hard to imagine. Yeah. Hard to imagine, like, we talk about identity loss, like you finding that purpose and going through all those things in 4 years on active duty service, and suddenly it being stopped, right? Like I think we simplify it by saying identity loss, but like that's a huge change, and mandatory change in your behalf, right?
Yeah, words don't do it justice, man. It really doesn't. I mean, it's like telling somebody, I think we wrote this in the book, it's like telling somebody that they need to breathe without being able to use oxygen. That just doesn't make any sense. How am I supposed to do what I'm supposed to do if I can't do what I'm supposed to do? And it's always difficult, maybe more difficult when you don't have the opportunity to downshift and downregulate and prepare a transition, as opposed to coming to the end of your career. I'm not saying that that is any different, but there's a level of preparation for that. And when it's kind of through an injury or the mechanism of being injured, that just isn't afforded to one. And more importantly, to your spouse if you're married, your extended family and your children. So again, yeah, man, at that time, my entire identity was wrapped up in being a Green Beret, and more specifically, like I talked about, a combat leader, and finding very much a place at home there. And there's a simplicity to combat. There's gray there for sure, but I feel like there's less gray there than in normal everyday life. It's black and white to me when you make that comparison. And man, you sharpen your skill set. You work on your tools. You look at the variables and control the other controllables that you have. So you focus in on a very specific mission with very specific people, in a very specific terrain, going on and on. That can be very black and white and somewhat easier to deal with. Not to mention, like, all your finances are taken care of. It might not be the most in the world, but you don't really got to think about that. Like, finances, they're locked in, so don't think about that anymore. That's, even though like you're not balling, your family's taken care of, and you have to spend zero time there. And they do that for a very specific reason in that way, and it's a very intelligent way to do it. So literally, all your mental energy and then your physical presence can be focused on the mission, and that's why we're able to cultivate these exceptional individuals into exceptional teams. So and just kind of reiterate, man, think about that. You go in every day with the people that you find to be the most exceptional people, if you're lucky, that you've ever come across. Now, in SF, there's plenty of people that I didn't get along with, or I didn't want to necessarily work with, but at least we had that common respect about the shared sacrifice that we at least all endure to get to that point. Now, there's variations in a spectrum of worthy and unworthy, or respected and unrespected individuals on an individual basis. But again, you had that. I was very blessed, man. Like I said, same ODA the entire time, and my experience was phenomenal. Had some weak leaders, had some great leaders. Got to see the contrast of that. And there's things to learn with both types, always. And again, so doing the things that we love with the people we love, ultimate sacrifices, ultimate service. Stakes couldn't be higher. Requires absolute best, or you don't stay there. How do you go from that to saying you'll never do that again, and you weren't even given a moment's notice to ponder the secondary path? Absolute disaster and nightmare. So throw on to that fire the fact that, hey man, like, something's going on with this guy. For me, I didn't know what it was. Started to have new problems. Obviously, to get to that point, I had to show a certain, just like all of us, a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of physical fitness, a certain level of mental toughness, a certain level of communication skills and teamwork skills, and all these other complex and exemplary attributes to be in that environment, to starting be calm under pressure, to make a living making difficult decisions in life and death situations, to not being able to operate in public, to not be able to keep it together at home emotionally for no reason in front of your wife and children, to have panic attacks in the unit weight room for no reason and then not being able to stop it, to have this unbelievable depression come over you with not really having a reason to be depressed. Like, I'm living the life I want to live. How could I possibly be depressed? I'm not ashamed of anything that we've done in combat. I like to do more of that. start to lose your cognitive abilities, your short-term memory, your vocabulary, not able to focus, not able to read, then start to have the physical problems that accompany all those things, in addition to sexual dysfunction or not being able to perform in that arena with no telltale signs. Again, we're the model for like physical fitness or what a man should be like, and now all of a sudden, like, that whole area of life just gets shut down, and there's no really nothing pointing to why. And sleep, now I can't sleep, and so I'm fatigued, I'm overwhelmed and fatigued, but I can't seem to sleep, I can't seem to rest. Bring on headaches that turn into migraines, that turn into blurry vision, that turn into double vision, that turn into balance issues where it's difficult to walk in a straight line. And then say, hey man, I'm having some serious problems. I need some help. I don't know what it is. Let's fix it so I can get back to work. And the only answer that you're given is, here's this cocktail of pharmaceutical drugs, and here's some psychotherapy that you can talk to someone who's never been in a combat situation and couldn't tell you the difference between a barrel and a buttstock, to try to tell you how to identify goals and then go after them and accomplish them. It's laughable. And the medication started to have a negative effects, where I was worse than when I started. And more than that, it zombified me and like just pushed me in a corner where I was just kind of like drooling on myself. And the only thing I know to do to stop these panic attacks is to drink alcohol. And then you basically turn into a raging alcoholic, not because I'm having a good time and partying, because I don't know any other way to stop these panic attacks. So couple all that with a loss of purpose. Now, like, my life is going off the rails. I really think I'm losing my mind. I've told, it's you've been in a lot of explosions, but we really don't think that that's a strong correlation to what you're dealing with. We think it's more of a psychological issue. And that never sat right with me, because it was like, I had somebody tell me this: you've seen so much combat and you have all these filing cabinets internally, and you're filing all these difficult things away. And there's been so many now, you can no longer close the cabinet, and all that's spilling out. And what you see is yourself malfunctioning because of that. And there was no objective evidence. There was no tests. That was just somebody's opinion. But that person that made that opinion could write things about me in my medical file, and then, recommend to put on drug A, B, C, D, E, F. And that was that, man. So that is what we're seeing in large part, guys, in the community today. So couple our identity crisis with the physical, the cognitive, the emotional, and then also the spiritual damage that's being inflicted on our warriors. And then think about that and magnify that out to their spouses and their children. Well, it's a big problem. And it starts with the identity crisis, but that only goes deeper, man. And so when somebody's really pondering how to life get this out of whack, we start to understand the identity crisis coupled with those other things. It's no wonder that we're seeing our brothers, sisters committing suicide in what seems to be record numbers, or at a minimum, numbers that are not improving year over year, so far as I understand the research. So long rant, Patrick, on identity crisis, but I just think it's really relevant, man. And I want that to go out, and hopefully it resonates with whoever's listening, or that really hits home, or they've seen that firsthand. Because when I was first experiencing this, I'll put it this way, guys, we started seeing guys in first group. I remember our first suicides, and I think it was 2012, maybe 2011. But when I really started, it was more than just one here or there. And these weren't new guys. These were experienced, like I said, war fighters who made a living of making difficult decisions in life and death situations. So as a SF community, we were shocked when these things first started happening, because the thought was like, what a coward, and how selfish, and I just can't believe like somebody would fall to that. But there was just a level of ignorance on my part and the community at large, not really understanding what was going on. And so start to see that more and more and more, and then start to put two and two together. And it was like, man, then I lived it. Started to say, like, this is this is a slope which can lead to that line of thinking and to that outcome. So, and again, it starts with potentially that identity crisis or the things that led up to that, losing one's identity of being an operator.
Yeah, so ultimately, what pushed you into medical retirement is some of the symptoms that we're talking about, like you having depression, crying in the team room. That is is that correct? Am I understanding you?
Ultimately, what led to that was traumatic brain injury, a post-traumatic stress, and a couple of other major ones that I forget the terminology, but make you not serviceable anymore. And I had another one that was a blood clot issue that came on after some of the medication, and those together made me ineligible, to move forward by military standards.
So you were talking about that separation from team, and how it had an influence on your overall mental health and physicality. Um, can you expand a little bit on that? And I think that takes us into this journey that everybody's familiar with, um, whether it's your Quiet Explosions or your book, and the work that everyone's doing over at Warriors Angels Foundation. Um, that separation from community, that separation from purpose, led you to connect with Dr. Mark Gordon.
Yeah, it did. Well, I had to go through a week and really do some internal reflection. You don't really get the opportunity to do that in spec ops while you're operational. It's just not really built in to the mechanism, and it's not where anybody's, at least from my experience, where the mindset was, because it's all very forward thinking on what's next and how to make sure, dear God, that I can put all these scrapes and scratches and bruises and broken bones right, so I can catch the next lift, if you will, so to speak. So part of that dark night of the soul, we talked about losing community, losing identity, being diagnosed with something like having brain trauma or brain damage. First time you hear something like that, it's incredibly startling. Come again? What do you mean my brain is damaged? And you're telling me it's permanent. There's no coming back from it, and that things are not going to be the same. Matter of fact, they're probably just going to get worse. Man, that's a tough one. In addition to, like I said, all the emotional and physical ailments that come with that. So my dark night of the soul encompassed all of that. Then you're dealing with alcohol abuse in my case. Then started to have issues inside my family. My oldest boy was 13 months old at the time, and developed a serious illness. Required a number of surgeries, and it was life threatening. And trying to navigate that in the middle of everything else was an absolute nightmare. Because I think we'll all agree we'll endure whatever we have to watch your child suffer, and for them not to be able to comprehend why they're suffering, and to witness that, it's awful. And so I remember being at my son, he's at Seattle Children's, just had the last operation that he had, a major operation, this massive growth out of his neck. It was inhibiting him from having a clear breath pathway up, and crushed one of his lungs. And he's really struggling in ICU after the surgery. There was a moment there where he finally lay down. He was getting some sleep, and I'm there at his bedside. And it's a very specific moment, man. I took the last, the lot pain pill I ever took, and I washed it down with the airplane bottle of whiskey because that's like what I kept in my pocket on the DL to drink in the hospital. When I was at his bedside, and just understood at that point in time that it was very clear the path I was on was going to kill me. Um, but but what was worse than that is the realization that I was of absolutely zero value to my boy, to my other children, to my wife at that point in time. Um, so what I promised myself and my son there at his bedside was basically three things. One, that I was going to return to the man of my pre-injury status, and whatever obstacle presented itself was at that point made irrelevant. It had no meaning, had no weight with me. It would either be breached or bypassed. But that was going to happen. Number two, after that, was I was going to come off all the medication that I was told I was going to have to be on for the rest of my life. And once those two were accomplished, the third promise was that I would spend the rest of my life turning around and helping other individuals and families who found themselves in a very similar situation that I found myself in and my family found themselves in. And that wasn't like, poof, you're better and all your problems are gone. And matter of fact, you never face any problems again. No, not at all. But it was a shift in consciousness. It was a shift in mindset. And that moved me from one time track or one line of time, and it placed me in a new one. And from that point on, I started to think very, very different. Thinking was how would someone think who was able to get on the other side of this? What would that person do? What would that person look like? How would they orient their life? I can no longer be an operator, but I'm a husband and a father. I want to be the best husband and father I can be. Never put myself fully into that. What does that look like? And if that means that I'm going to take different steps, new actions to produce new results with my health, then I'm willing to do it. Because let me tell you, being on the wrong side of health, not somewhere you want to be, man. You get sucked into the system, and the system has you. Mm-hmm. Very few people are able to navigate themselves out fully or come to a resolution where they can say, I'm healed and I no longer am that. That was a symptom, the underlying condition. We addressed it, and now I'm beyond it, and I'm back to functioning at the level that I wish to be. So, that started to change how I looked at health, how I looked at, treating things, and then looking at let's call it the military medical industrial complex or model. Western medicine in general, we all know, is great for trauma care. Absolute best. Incredible. We've probably already all dealt with that firsthand experience. Doesn't really do well with what to do after that. And that's where I started to experience that wholeheartedly, and many of us in the community. So what I had was 7 different specialists, again, putting me on a multitude of medications, and every specialist was just concerned with their quote-unquote specialty. And if it fell outside of the parameters of that specialty, well, it was not of their concern. And I was like, well, it's all connected. How can you look at things in this isolated mechanistic viewpoint? Because if you're anybody that really thinks about it and studies as it, knows that there's upstream and downstream effects. And why is that not being addressed? And so again, started to ask questions, start really to get science-minded and say, well, geez, man, okay, this is new. All these symptoms are new, but it did start. It started here. All right, well, what was different? Is there a time period where things were different, and they start to think like, well, man, now that I think about it, I've been in a lot of blasts. I wonder if that could have any negative effect on anything, any internal system. And so I had to teach myself all this because there was nobody feeding me this information. And mind you, I have a difficult time sitting down and reading something for more than 10 minutes at a time, but I was committed to doing it. And so I started to look at the scientific literature, which led me to eventually the endocrine system and the neuroendocrine system. And I started to find literature out there that talked about damage to these systems from external forces. And lo and behold, the symptoms that result from that are the exact symptoms that I'm experiencing. Interesting. Then I wonder if there's a way we could test for that, because it didn't seem to be tested in any objective fashion to identify those things. And so that's an area I ended up to ultimately. But between like, hey, that crossroads decision with my son and, finding things that worked for me, it was like I went all over the country to all these different brain centers to do any alternative modality that I knew about, that somebody had told me that there had been benefit from, there might have been potential benefit from, to see if I could get any relief and any sustained relief. And again, what that ultimately led me to was Dr. Mark Gordon, someone who practices neuroendocrinology out in Los Angeles and is one of the best in the world in it. And he had this ability to diagnose and treat the underlying ability of traumatic brain injury by identifying what's going on in the brain and the body through some specific lab tests. And we were able to identify exactly what was going on with me, what was the actual problems, what caused it, and what do we need to do in an individual level to address that through as most natural way as possible. And when that was applied to me, I was turned back on and went from having all those symptoms, all those problems, all those diagnoses, all those medications, to that was in early 2015. And since that time, going on a very personalized treatment program that assessed my unique biochemical individuality and some of the damages or the insufficiencies of that, and then how to bring those back up to optimal physiological levels. I've been symptom medication free since 2015, and I'm performing as good, if not better, than my pre-injury status. There's nothing limiting me from having the energy that I need to live the life that I want to live. And that's not special or specific to me. We've replicated that thousands of times. But so that's the process of looking for that holistic model. And the question became one of, hey, is there an underlying condition? Are there underlying conditions that we can trace back? And if there is, can we address that? Can we address that in a holistic fashion to achieve balance and harmony internally? And then once you do that, man, you start looking at other ways, like, okay, what can I do for my sleep? What can I do for my nutrition? And then the list goes on and on and on and on. But for me, that was the lowest hanging fruit that we could address. Start having some real achievable wins that made a noticeable difference in my ability to do life on a day-to-day basis.
Was that, so, and I watched the documentary and hearing your story, is this, you're looking for these answers by yourself, essentially, right? There's no other doctors involved. You're like, I'm going to figure this out. And Dr. Gordon immediately can identify what's wrong. And how long from when you started that treatment to when you were noticeable differences?
Yeah, so it's hard to fathom, but I had a immediate success. And so here's just one instance. Testosterone, and more importantly, free testosterone. Because total testosterone is a worthless diagnostic because it's not usable. But free testosterone is usable in the body. That was never discussed with me, if any, the endocrinologist or the neuroendocrinologist that I've talked about. And no one ever talked about my free test levels. They talked about my total test levels, which, again, is a useless metric. But we could identify, okay, well, his free testosterone is deficient. As a matter of fact, it's grossly deficient. It's almost if it's not there. Well, where does that stem from? And then there's secondary things that can be looked at between the hypothalamus and pituitary, and that's sending a signal to the testicles. So then we can identify, okay, where's there an interruption in that communication? And you can't fake the funk on that. And then you can identify where that is and then why that is. there's only very specific reasons for that happening. Trauma. And that trauma is also not going to show up on in any fancy imaging, because it's a result of rampant chronic inflammation. So so by him identifying that and saying, okay, man, the body is grossly deficient in this, and now we know all the secondary, tertiary benefits of something like testosterone. When he gave me an injection to see how I would respond to it, within 3 hours, my anxiety completely subsided. Same thing with like rage and depression, and I noticed that immediately. And then when we were able to get on a proper anti-inflammatory protocol, address micronutrient deficiencies and the rest of the neurosteroid basically imbalances or insufficiencies, if you will, like I've never looked back. So that varies to individual. So I had almost like immediate success. Some people we've seen take as long as 6 months to see any type of benefit. Everybody who's stuck with the program has had their quality of life improved, both objectively through us analyzing these biomarkers and subjective, self-reporting that we put out. And like I said, usually if it takes somebody longer, then one or two things: they've been a substance abuse issue that's been going on for a while, or they've been on certain medications that are just very damaging, and it takes the body a while to actually detox those types of things. So that's the variation, and all of us. And of course, there's much more variation in that, but that's some of the major things that can cause a person from having, like I had, a very quick and rapid response, which proved to be sustainable over time, to someone that might take a little bit more time than say that I did.
Yeah, I mean, this is really fascinating stuff, right? And a couple of different things, but you look at your profile from 2015 on, and all the things that you've accomplished. I mean, you went to Stanford and done the Ignite program. You got your MBA from Pepperdine. I mean, if there's somebody who just admitted he couldn't read for more than 10 minutes at a time, you just went and got, a degree and a certification from two, highly ranked schools, wrote a book, and released a documentary. And now you serve as board members on two nonprofits and run your own. I mean, in 7 years. That's a lot to accomplish from that moment of pain I just heard you talk about. Like, it's hard to process. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's also like, whoa.
For sure. And so there's no comparisons. I don't want anybody drawing comparisons out there that's hurting or that's suffering. Simply use what you heard there as hope and proof that it is possible. That's it. This is what this is about. I'm here to tell you, based off my personal experience, and I have the medical file to support it. So, my reputation, we wouldn't have got to this point if this was made up. You know what I mean? And so this serves as hope and proof to anybody else out there that's having the same issues, that your quality of life can and will improve when certain things are introduced or reintroduced that you're lacking. And there is absolutely at all times a spiritual component of that. But we have a physiology. We have all these things. That's real. And that's cause and effect relationship. And we can properly identify those things, and that will give you a clarity of mind to maybe put other things in your life right where you need to, where you didn't have the capacity or clarity or presence of mind because of the injury to do that. That's the only reason we do this stuff, man. Otherwise, I'd rather, I don't know. That's the main reason we do it, man, to put the information out there, just because of what the community was for us, and I know you guys, this is why you do the podcast, so you can put information out there that can help people that that you know and that you love, and the community that you love. So that's what it's all about. Proof, man. It's proof, and it can be overwhelming, but that's the story. At the foundation, we say answers, hope, and healing. That's what we want to provide answers where for most none. The many case stories we have, um, you know, there's your hope, and put those into action, and then that can equate to healing, real healing. So, thank you for kind of highlighting that, Patrick.
Yeah, I think Daniel wants to speak up too, but I just want to go back into this topic because I think, especially guys in this community, right? I got in '05, different than it is now, right? A lot of time went by, but hormone replacement therapy, right, is now, you can Google it and you can get stuff from anywhere, right? You can. So I want to kind of make a differentiation between what you're talking about and sort of this, if there is one, with an HRT, your local
Yeah.
HRT expert, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, how can I best say this? You need to treat this with a high degree of due diligence, and really into what you're doing. If you're having somebody that's running an incomplete panel and they're putting you on a very high dose of something, anything that we put in our bodies, there's no free lunch, man. There's going to be a consequence. If that's not addressed or identified or thought through, then there will be one of two things. There will be upstream or downstream problems, most likely downstream problems. So what you're putting in your body is going to cause secondary, what will be experienced as a negative issue, and that could be done in a short period of time. That could be done over a long period of time. But if you put something in the body like testosterone, and you're not identifying levels of other neurosteroids, I'll spit out two for instance, one called DHEA, another called pregnenolone. Well, if those aren't balanced correctly, you're not going to get any benefit of putting that testosterone in your body. So then that's going to start to do things that are not beneficial to the physiology, to the downstream chemistry. Now we start to have real problems. So that's kind of the issue with this HRT kind of runaway craze, is they're popping up all over the place, and let's give you testosterone because that's what you need. But if you can address that without having to go on a hormone to replace in the meantime, well, then that's the best route. So, again, not here to tell anybody how to live their life, but a lot of those don't have the best reputation. And so you want to find things that use the best objective lab markers that they can find to identify what's going on. More importantly, man, you need to identify not just because if numbers are low, like why are they low? And is there a lifestyle change that you need to make first before doing that? You need to put a lot of thought into and if this is the right treatment for you. So not that HR clinic, but have been used, and they think were really the intended benefit was met by the recipients. And I know this because we receive those guys and gals in our work all the time. So I know it's a real thing. It's a real potential problem.
Hey, Andrew, I appreciate you working through. We've had some connection issues, but we're working through it. So, hey, as we finish this out, we really want to give you the floor to talk about your book and the documentary and the work you're doing with Warrior Angels. And yeah, man, can you just lay it out for us?
Takeaways from the work that we've done with Gordon and Warrior Angels in the realm of traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress is that what we're finding many times, whether it's a post-traumatic stress diagnosis or anxiety, depression, or any of these different mood disorders, there is a significant physiological component to that. All right, what do you mean by that? I mean that very well could be from a physical injury. And because it's not properly diagnosed, or it goes undiagnosed, or it's misdiagnosed, that can lead to issues. And so where does it all stem from? So we didn't really get into too much, but the consequences of being around explosive blast waves is that the brain is encased inside a skull, right? This hard skull, and it's floating in fluid, cerebral spinal fluid. And it is emitting an explosion, an immense amount of energy is propagated in a 360 degree direction. And that energy passes through, the body, and the skull literally bounces back and forth, front to back or side to side. And by definition, every one of those is a head injury or head trauma, concussion or traumatic brain injury, however you want to slice it up. And that happens a significant amount of times with in a millisecond. That over time can be very detrimental. So what that causes is the vessels that contain this chemistry to tear or shear, or to have these like micro holes torn in them, and it starts to leak chemistry that's not intended to be out in that capacity. So you can think of it as like a slow burn or slow leak in a tire, and you might not notice anything right away. You might not notice anything in a few months, several years. But that, nonetheless, if that process continues and it's not properly addressed, it doesn't just go away on its own when it goes in that chronic state. So what you have is a state of what's called chronic neuroinflammation, which just means that this necessary biological consequence that's needed in an acute state, like right after an injury, can really be detrimental if it's going on long term. And that's exactly what's happening here. So it's literally kind of eroding the cell there, and that's inhibiting or limiting that cell-to-cell communication. That's how we do life. So many times, well, what does that mean? What manifests? Well, what manifests from that is the downstream effects of things that we call post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, mood disorder. And I'm not saying that there's not just a psychological component of that, but I'm saying that there is also most certainly a physiological one that does not get addressed. All right, so what do we do about that? Well, you need a personalized approach to identify what's going on. We found that doing that with a lab and people in our community, especially operators, all of them, if they've been more than a day in SOF, most likely have been and have suffered from head trauma or repetitive head trauma, which has led to this neuroinflammation, which has caused what we'll call the neurosteroids, hormones produced in the brain, and hormones produced below the neck, to become deficient or insufficient, or they don't work as they used to, or they're not working properly. This again causes downstream effects. So we need to identify that as objectively as possible. What does that mean? What do we do once we identify that? You got to turn off, stop the bleeding. Same thing with the inflammation. Well, how do we stop the inflammation? Well, you need something that's anti-inflammatory. And there is a number of incredible endogenous things the body creates on its own to deal with that. So how can we spark that, or how can we supplement that? And there's a lot of different excellent ways to do that. What you want is a multi-pathway. You want to work on as many pathways as possible and have a robust to give the brain the building blocks it needs to repair the damage, and it can be repaired. That's always step one. And then step two is, if you are deficient in this important chemistry that runs the brain and the body, then we need to look to replace that or replenish that back to what we call optimal physiological levels. And that has been the success of our program. That has been the success of medical director, Dr. Gordon. And we also use another phenomenal doctor, Michael Lewis, who was the Department of Defense's subject matter expert for the treatment and diagnosis and treatment of TBI while he was as a Colbert colonel. And that is the process that we can, and the patient always directs the treatment, and the patient's labs always direct the treatment. So we listen to their complaints and then think about ranges differently than how they're currently addressed. So very simply put, reference ranges. Reference ranges are not applicable to you or I unless we were somebody that was in the group that they studied for that specific range. What do you really mean by that? So if a range comes in between 10 is low, on the low end, but it's within range, so you're within the range on a 10, and you're within the range on a 90, anywhere that you fall in there, you're with a quote-unquote range. So if you come in at 11 on a range, which is low, but it's within range, and you have all these complaints, the current medical system says, well, you're within range, you have no problems, you need no supplementation, or you need to replenish nothing. Well, that's not really looking at the individual holistically, because that reference range might not apply to them. They might be different than the subjects that were studied there. So what we do is we take the 10 and the 90, we add it together, that's 100. Divide by 2, and you get what? You get the mean, 50. So we shoot to move somebody up to the mean level, and we monitor them over time. When they get to the 50th percentile, if they're feeling better, awesome. No further moves are needed. If they're not, then we course adjust and we fine tune based off of their subjective standings and the objective ones with the labs. And that's how we personalize medicine. That's how we individualize medicine. And then if you can do that in a holistic manner that's as natural as possible, then you're not really going to have the system just shut down on itself, which is what we don't want. So what I'm talking about here, guys, is, a little bit different than the common model. But when you start to think about it, really, it's why it's outside of the norm. It's within the confines of science, very much so, and evidence-based, and everything is researched to the nth degree, FDA approved and HIPAA compliant. And so it's really not that radical. It's radical when if these things aren't identified or looked at in these ways. So main takeaway is a lot of people might be suffering from a misdiagnosed or an undiagnosed head trauma, or the things that lead to this non-neuropermissive environment, which is the inflammatory state, and they don't even know about it. And they're doing all these other things, and it's not working. And it's not working because the underlying condition has not been identified or addressed. So that's been the genesis and the follow-through of our work with the foundation, the reason for writing a book, the reason for that getting turned into a documentary, and the reason that we continue to support the community in the fashion that we do is so it can provide answers to being the ones that we just talked about, which is all backed up by hard science, and we have the clinical empirical evidence to support it. Hope being stories just like mine. Man, if you see the movie, you're going to see a bunch of stories. These people aren't made up. These are everyday, real people. Some of them might happen to be Super Bowl MVPs, and some might happen to be accountants. But rock bottom looks the same for all of us, and this is what it looks like. And then if you address this correctly, those answers, that hope, can lead to healing. And that's also been one of the main themes that we wanted to push with the film, is to let people know of these alternative therapies that are working and the people behind it. So that's what we've been all about. Been real supportive in psychedelic assisted therapy to be done in the right way in a clinical environment where we're done with real professionals. And that has also been shown to produce some significant results, what the FDA calls breakthrough therapies, these psychedelic assisted therapies. And we've been supporting legislation that looks to go about doing that the right way. Been very successful here in getting that done in Texas, and now working with other states and other federal entities to have this modality available to people that it could benefit. And veterans with traumatic brain injury and or traumatic stress are absolutely a potential major upside to benefit from these modalities as they come out. So the research is out. As far as I'm concerned, the jury is out if it's done correctly. and done the right way. And so it's also something worth looking into for your audience there, with other groups called like VETS, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, or Heroic Hearts. Those are two leading the way there and getting that level of care to our veterans that need it, and service members. And so we'll just continue to go and look for things that we know that work, that are backed by science, that are validated, and have also, and people in our community, they have a story and they can give their experience about it, put all those things together, and we triangulate something that works. We're going to go after, and we're going to make sure that our people can have access to it, bottom line. So that's been about what we're at, past, present, and we'll continue to do so in the future.
Yeah, I think your story really summarizes where you were at.
Yeah.
You talked about being at your son's bedside and wanting to return to pre-operational status, get off medication, and help others. And this has been a wonderful story to listen to how you've been able to do that in both your personal insight and then creating the foundation to help others.
That's it.
Yeah. No, Andrew, we appreciate having you on, man. This has been it's been an eye-opening conversation, and hopefully we can get your message out to more people. I know I watched the documentary on Amazon. I think that's probably the easiest way to get it, right? Or maybe purchase it through your website. But watch that. I know Daniel's read the book. And so if people are wanting to pursue this type of treatment, they go to the website and they go to the enroll portion.
WarriorAngelsFoundation.org, and everything you need to know is on that page. It's a big lightning strike. So I don't know if you guys heard that, but go to the website, WarriorAngelsFoundation.org, and it's all there.